Is traditional or legacy media dying or dead?
I think it's on its way out unless it pivots. It has to pivot. And I think we're seeing finally a sense that legacy media is beginning to try and adapt the new tricks of the trade, as it were. Because for so long, they think they can publish 20,000 word Pulitzer Prize winning pieces and they all high five each other, but actually nobody's been reading them. And that is finally sunk home. And
journalists doing journalism for other journalists?
Exactly. So, I revere that kind of investigative reporting, etc. But we have to find new ways to have the impact. It's impact that's gone away. You can write all this stuff and nobody reads it. That's the agony of it all. So we're seeing now, I think, a much greater efforts in trying to kind of emulate the sort of the shorter bites, the TikTok, breaking pieces up essentially into these other formats. And that's beginning to, I think, work much better.
But when I look at your own sort of record in journalism, you created the combination of highbrow and populist. In a way, the light and the shadows were always there in the Vanity Fair model in particular. Today, there's a sort of denseness to the way traditional media approaches content. I
totally agree. I find it, part of me feels, they make such a meal out of making something better. Do you know what I mean? It's like the Washington Post, for instance, is going through this whole kind of massive crisis about who they should be. And I think who they should be, it's so obvious to me. It should be much more of a high-low mix. They have the Trump administration to cover. Can you imagine the topic, the fun of that? The horror of that, the fun of that. Let the news pages do what they do. But where is the great hilarious pieces about the new Trump women and the kind of the money they're spending and the tech takeovers and all the stuff that's happening? They don't know how to do the high-low. They really don't. And they're so sort of furrow-browed about it, And I think that actually British journalism is far less pretentious. I think because British journalists consider it they don't consider it a profession so much as a craft. It's always been that way. And America is really dominated by journalism schools. My husband, who was a great editor, abhorred journalism schools because he thought that they just turned out these kind of Ivy League, sort of same mindset, usually liberal, totally thinking the same way. Whereas his newspaper was full of people with odd backgrounds and someone who'd been in, come out of the army, somebody who was in, an art dealer, people who'd sort of come from all kinds of places, made the paper much more alive and much more connected to the world instead of these boring, journalism school people. And I think they've wrecked American journalism.
I went to one of those journalism schools, but after I'd worked for a couple of years and I literally learned nothing except the experience of living in New York City. What I learned was outside of the J school.
I didn't know that you'd ever gone to J school. I can't imagine Barkha Dutt at a J school.
I felt suffocated.
It
was suffocating.
Yeah, interesting.
It really was suffocating because I felt like I knew more than what they were teaching me. And that I know that sounds boastful, but it was so straight-laced and, without any experimentation. The question for you is this, the White House at its first press briefing just announced that seats would be reserved for social media influencers. Before we get to all that ails traditional media, and you've spelled out some of it, there's somebody like yourself, a brilliant editor, a brilliant writer. I didn't say in my introduction that you're also the author of multiple best-selling books. Do you sometimes feel, what did I do all this for? Now some kid who's an influencer is given more importance in this age that we live in?
Well, I think it's lamentable, actually, because, I hate all of this kind of unresearched, opinionated, third-rate sort of garbage they're all spewing out and everybody's listening. It is very depressing, actually. It's depressing how influential it is. That's the issue. We have in America now Joe Rogan, who is the leading podcaster of this genre. And he is the most influential man in America. And it is an incredible thing to think of.
Would you go on his podcast?
Probably would, yes, because the fact is that it would bring me to this massive audience. That's the question. Kamala Harris, when she ran, she declined to go on his podcast, And we know the end of that story, right? So yes, it is very vexing. But I sort of feel more that real journalists have just got to fight back by getting as good as these influencers are at having that impact and using the tools, as it were, to have that impact. The problem is that very often great journalists are not necessarily particularly telegenic. I mean, when I had a TV show, as I don't have to tell you, I thought, great, all the people who worked on The New Yorker will be on my show, it'll be fantastic. I soon realized that, put them on and they were actually couldn't do it, and that you were looking for performers all the time. So in a way, it's a sort of essential thing, both in politics now and in media. You have to be able to sort of perform your stuff. And if you can't, no one is going to read it.
I mean, politics in the age of Trump is a full performance art, and we'll get to Trump in a moment. But do you not feel uncomfortable that the media, I mean, I'm all for great storytelling, but I'm a little bit squeamish about being an actor. And I think the two are different. And, there's this whole generation of influencers who are actually, it's like theater.
Yeah. I'm very squeamish about it because I think that most of the best investigative journalists are not remotely actors. I mean, they're usually quite nerdy, I mean, sort of interior, curmudgeonly, actually. It's a sort of trait of the investigative journalists. They're so skeptical that, basically they're not sunshine and light. I mean, they're all. Yeah. And I love those people. I mean, those are the people I've often worked with for years who do great work. I mean, they sit in their room, they just grind it out. They're not interested, actually, at all in being actors. So, it's a lamentable thing that is a
But
fact.
you've adapted. You're on Substack.
Yes, actually, I have decided to start Substack 4 months ago. Mine is called Fresh Hell. Yeah. And why did I decide to do it? I mean, first of all, they badgered me and asked me. And then I thought, well, actually, I do want to be in a platform that is sort of leading edge as opposed to having a column in a legacy media newspaper, which I could have done. And I'm finding it actually quite exhilarating because of the direct, unmediated sort of relationship. But the first week or two I started writing it, I felt like I was swimming naked. I mean, you are self-publishing. I'm used to sending a piece in, having
it edited,
responded to, back and forth.
Playback.
And so actually, of course, what I immediately did was then spend all the earnings I was making on Substack by hiring an editor, having a lawyer. I gave myself those things because I wouldn't write without an editor looking at it. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't trust myself. And let alone not have a legal read. I mean, I've never done anything without a legal read.
Yeah.
So I want those things, but it is a strange feeling to realize that you're just sort of putting yourself out there without any of that protective covering. So, I mean, I was nervous at first and I thought this is really not going to be for me at all. But actually, since then, it's quite exciting to see the spike of readers and really know who they are. I mean, they send their emails. There are all these people out there who I don't know, who suddenly are these readers. Yeah. And, we have these reader chats now and they're very smart, really very smart people.